Related. SLS launched last night. Did you watch it? If you did, and you wanted some more information on that rocket, enjoy this repost. There's an old adage in show business: never work with children or animals. This is because children and animals are agents of chaos and behave very unpredictably in front of a camera. To that list, I would add rockets. In 2014, I developed and produced a Science Channel series profiling what America was doing in space after the end of the Space Shuttle program. It was an ambitious series, and we hoped to capture some of the most astonishing new technologies coming down the pike.
Man versus the universe.
It didn't work out as well as we'd hoped. While in production, SpaceX assured us that we would be able to film the first ever launch of their Falcon Heavy rocket, the most powerful rocket to leave Earth since the Saturn V. That didn't happen until 4 years after our show aired. Similarly, NASA told us that they hoped to get the Space Launch System, or the SLS, off the ground before we aired, and this was the one that we really wanted to cover. The SLS's first flight is tomorrow, 8 years after the show debuted. Listen, I'm not criticizing NASA or SpaceX. Rocket science is hard, and it takes time to make sure that everything works, especially in the case of NASA, when your goals are constantly being undermined every couple of years by a new president and a new Congress. All that to say that you're going to want to set your alarm for tomorrow morning, Monday, for 5:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Why? Because we are going to the moon. This is Artemis. And this is the SLS, the largest, heaviest, most powerful, and yes, most expensive rocket humans have ever made. NASA can't use a SpaceX Falcon 9 to get to the moon. Those rockets work for low Earth orbit flights to the International Space Station. But to get to the moon, which is roughly 239,000 miles from Earth, or 1,000 times the distance to the International Space Station, we need something far bigger and far more powerful. Tomorrow's mission is Artemis 1, but there won't be any crew aboard. The plan is to fly the uncrewed Orion capsule thousands of miles past and around the moon, and then return it to Earth for a splashdown 3 weeks later. This flight is as much a test of the SLS as it is the Orion capsule, because Artemis 2 will send astronauts on a flight in orbit around the moon. And then, in 2024, Artemis 3 will land the first woman and the first person of color on the lunar surface. The first time humans will have stood on the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972. And then, on to Mars. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The SLS stands 322 feet high. That's 138 feet taller than the Space Shuttle. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty and London's Big Ben, though this version is 41 feet shorter than the Saturn V. Later versions will be taller. The SLS weighs 5.75 million pounds when fully fueled, and will produce 8.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff, 15% more powerful than the Saturn V. That's enough thrust to keep 8 Boeing 747s in the air. If parts of this rocket look familiar, well, you have keen eyes, because the Space Shuttle isn't really gone. The SLS's 4 main RS-25 engines all come from the Space Shuttle. They provide twice the power needed to move 10 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers at 30 knots. If you converted the energy output of the SLS's engines into electricity, it could power nearly 850,000 miles of streetlights. That's a road long enough to stretch from the Earth to the moon and back again, plus 15 more times around the Earth. The engines consume 1,500 gallons of propellant per second. At that rate, you could drain an average swimming pool in just 13 seconds. And those solid rocket boosters on both sides of the central core are also holdovers from the shuttle era. They consume 5.5 tons of propellant per second and provide 75% of the total thrust in the first 2 minutes of flight, boosting the vehicle to nearly 4,000 miles per hour and an altitude of 27 miles high. The heat generated by the boosters during their 2 minutes of operation, if converted into electricity, would power 92,000 homes for a full day. Oh, and the rocket booster exhaust is hot enough to turn sand into glass. 8 minutes after blastoff, the main engines will shut down. By that time, the rocket will be moving at 18,000 miles per hour. Just how fast is that? Enough to cover 88 football fields placed end to end in just 1 second. And when the SLS's upper stage kicks in to break Orion out of Earth orbit and push the capsule to the moon, it will be moving at 110 football fields per second. So set those alarms and stay curious, my friends. Finally,